I never expected the truth to come out on Father's Day of all days. It was supposed to be a quiet afternoon, the kind I'd grown used to over the past few years since moving into the smaller house off Birchwood Lane. My son Derek would stop by. We'd sit on the back porch, and he'd tell me about his promotions, his renovations, his life. I'd listen. I was good at listening, but that Sunday, something shifted before he even pulled into the driveway. He called ahead, which he rarely did. Said he was bringing a gift. Said Karen had insisted. I stood by the kitchen window watching his silver truck slow to a stop, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, a flicker of hope, small and cautious, like a flame in the wind. He came in carrying a grocery bag, a bottle of decent wine, and a smile I recognized from when he was 12 years old and had done something he was proud of. We hugged. I made coffee. Besat. So, Dad, he said after maybe 20 minutes of small talk, leaning back in his chair with that particular ease he'd inherited from his mother. How are you doing with the money? Karen said. She's been sending you $3,500 a month for the past 3 years. She wanted to make sure you're comfortable. I set my mug down very slowly. He was still smiling. Derek, I said. My voice came out lower than I intended. I haven't received a single dollar. My name is Harold Mercer. I'm 67 years old. I worked 31 years as a structural engineer for a municipal contracting firm in Columbus, Ohio. And I retired early, not by choice, but because the firm downsized and my position was among the first to go. My pension covered the basics. My savings, which I'd spent decades building, covered the rest. For a while, I was fine. Then my wife Margaret passed away. That was 4 years ago. In October, just before the leaves finished turning. She went quickly, a stroke. 3 days in the hospital. And then she was gone. After that, fine became a word I used out of habit rather than truth. Derek is our only child. He's 41 now. A project manager at a logistics company outside Cincinnati. He and Karen have been married for 9 years. I attended their wedding at a vineyard in the Finger Lakes. It was beautiful. Karen wore a dress with a long train and laughed easily and often. I remember thinking my son had done well. In the months after Margaret's death, Derek called regularly. He visited twice. He helped me sort through her things. Her books, her garden tools, her half-finished cross-stitch projects. Those visits were painful and necessary, and I was grateful for them. Then the calls became less frequent. The visits stretched to holidays only. I told myself this was natural. He had his life. I had mine. I didn't want to be the kind of father who made his son feel guilty for being busy. About 18 months after Margaret passed, Derek mentioned on a phone call that Karen had suggested setting up a monthly transfer to help with my expenses. He said she'd brought it up on her own, that she felt strongly about it, that she'd already set it up through her personal account. She wants to do this. Dad, he said. She actually insisted. She said, you gave us so much for the wedding. It's the least she could do. I remember feeling something warm move through me. I told him that wasn't necessary. He said Karen had already decided. I said I'd accept it with gratitude. We said goodnight. I waited for the deposit that month. Nothing came. I assumed there was a delay. A processing issue. Something administrative. I didn't mention it. I didn't want to seem ungrateful or demanding. I told myself I'd give it another month. Another month passed. Still nothing. I told myself perhaps the account information had been entered incorrectly. I told myself perhaps Karen had gotten busy and forgotten to finalize the transfer. I told myself many things. What I did not do was call Derek and ask. Looking back, I understand why. There is a specific kind of pride that belongs to fathers, a pride that would rather absorb a quiet loss than introduce the possibility that something is wrong. I had watched my own father carry that pride into his grave. I apparently carried it too. So I said nothing. I adjusted. I stopped replacing things when they wore out. I stopped eating out more than once a week. I turned the thermostat down 2 degrees in winter and up 2 degrees in summer. I told myself this was good discipline, that it kept me sharp. 3 years went by. Across those 3 years, Karen's name came up often in Derek's calls, and always in a particular way. She was mentioned as someone generous, someone thoughtful, someone who really cared about family. Karen sent a card to your neighbor after her surgery. Derek said once. I didn't even know she knew the woman's name. Karen donated to that food bank in your zip code. He said another time. She looked it up specifically. Karen talks about you all the time at dinner. He said. She says she wants to make sure you're comfortable. Each time, I made a small, agreeable sound. I did not say I have never received the money. I did not say your wife has not reached out to me directly in over a year. I did not say the thing that was sitting in the center of my chest like a stone. I had built Karen a mental portrait of someone genuinely kind because that was easier than questioning what I couldn't see. In person, she was different each time. When Derek and I had lunch alone in February of the previous year, she texted him 3 times before we'd finished our sandwiches. When the 3 of us had dinner at Christmas, she spoke mostly about their upcoming kitchen renovation and a dispute she'd had with a neighbor about property lines. She was pleasant enough. She laughed at appropriate moments. She asked me one question whether I preferred red or white wine and then didn't wait for my answer before flagging down the server. But I had no proof of anything. I only had a feeling I had chosen to suppress. Until Father's Day, after I told Derek I hadn't received anything. The table went quiet in a way that felt physical. Like a drop in air pressure, he stared at me. His expression went through several stages in the span of about 4 seconds. Confusion, then something that tried to be disbelief and couldn't quite get there. Then a very careful blankness that I recognized as the look people wear when they are beginning to understand something they don't want to understand. Dad, he said slowly, are you sure? I have 37 months of bank statements. I said, I've kept them in a folder. I don't know why I kept them. Maybe I always knew this conversation was coming. He pulled out his phone. His hands were not entirely steady. He pulled up something, an app. I assumed and scrolled for a long moment. Then he turned the screen toward me. There was a list of transactions. Monthly. Marked with my name. $3,500 each. 37 of them. It's been going out every month. He said. His voice was quiet. Every single month. It has never arrived. I said. He called Karen before I could say anything else. She picked up on the second ring. I could hear her voice through the phone, warm. Casual. Slightly distracted. The way people sound when they're half watching something on television. Derek asked her about the account. There was a brief pause. Then she said, of course. Honey. It goes to the account we set up. The one with the Westfield routing number. Derek looked at me. Dad. Do you have an account at Westfield? I've never banked at Westfield. I said, my account has been at Ohio Community Credit Union since 1987. Another silence. Longer this time. Karen. Derek said carefully. Can you read me the account number? She read a number. Derek wrote it on the back of the grocery receipt from the bag he'd brought in. He showed it to me. I looked at it. It meant nothing to me. It was not my account. It was not any account I had ever held. I watched my son's face as the truth settled into it. What followed was not a scene from a movie. There was no shouting. No door slammed. No dramatic declaration. What happened was quieter than that, and in some ways harder to watch. Derek ended the call. He sat for a very long time looking at the table. I refilled his coffee. I sat back down. Outside, a cardinal landed on the feeder I'd put up after Margaret died because she had always loved them, and then flew away. I need to go home, Derek said finally. I know. I said, Dad. He stopped, started again. I didn't know. I know you didn't. I said, why didn't you tell me? I thought about that for a moment. Because I didn't want to be the reason your marriage had a problem. I said, and because I wasn't completely sure, and because I don't know. Derek, I think I was ashamed. I felt like if I said it out loud, I'd be admitting that something was wrong with us. With our family. He nodded very slowly. He didn't try to talk me out of what I'd said, or reframe it into something easier. I was grateful for that. He left around 4 in the afternoon. He hugged me at the door, a real hug. Longer than usual. The kind you give when you don't know what else to offer. I stood on the porch and watched his truck until it turned off Birchwood Lane. I did not sleep well that night. I kept thinking not about the money, though the money mattered. I won't pretend it didn't, but about the architecture of the lie. The account at Westfield. The routing number. The monthly transactions going out from Derek's household and arriving somewhere that was not here. Someone had constructed that. Someone had thought it through. In the morning, Derek called. His voice was flat in the way that voices go flat after a night of hard conversation. I talked to her, he said. I figured. I said. She said the account was set up in your name. She said she thought it was your correct information. I waited. I don't believe her. He said. Those 4 words cost him something. I could hear it. Derek. I said. Whatever you decide to do, I support you. This is your marriage. I'm not asking you to. Dad. He said. Stop. I stopped. She took $129,000 over 3 years. He said. And she spent it. I went through our investment accounts this morning. The home equity line. Everything. There are gaps I didn't know were there. She's been moving things around. I didn't say anything. It wasn't just your money. He said. She's been, I don't know yet. I called a lawyer this morning. I called the bank. I called the fraud department. What came out over the following weeks was not simple. It was the kind of thing that expands the more you look at it. Karen had opened an account in a version of my name, Harold R. Mercer, with a middle initial I don't use at a regional bank where neither Derek nor I had any existing relationship. The monthly transfers from their joint account had gone into that account. She had been withdrawing from it steadily for 3 years. Some of it was spent on things Derek recognized, a designer bag she'd said was a gift from a work colleague. A solo trip to Scottsdale, she'd described as a company retreat. A number of smaller purchases he'd never thought to question. Some of it went to places that took longer to trace. Derek's attorney filed for divorce 8 days after Father's Day. Karen retained her own attorney and initially maintained that the account had been set up in good faith and that she had believed the information was correct. Her position changed when the bank provided documentation showing she had personally opened the account. In person. With identification. I was asked to provide a statement. I provided 37 months of bank records showing no deposits from Karen or from any account associated with her. I sat in a lawyer's office on a Tuesday morning and answered questions for 90 minutes. Afterward, I sat in my car in the parking garage for a while before I drove home. There were people who had opinions about what had happened. That is the nature of things. Derek's friends, the ones who'd known him before Karen, were largely unsurprised in the private way. People are when an outcome confirms a suspicion they'd been too polite to voice. His colleague Marcus, who'd been at the wedding, called me directly to check in. That surprised me. It meant something. Karen's family reached out to Derek through an intermediary, suggesting a mediated resolution, suggesting the account had been a misunderstanding. The intermediary called twice. Derek did not return those calls. My neighbor Paulette, who had watched my house during a long weekend I'd spent in Pittsburgh visiting an old college friend, brought over a casserole one evening and sat with me in the kitchen for an hour. She didn't ask many questions. She mostly listened and said, at the right intervals. I found myself grateful for that, in a way I hadn't expected. My brother Wallace called from Phoenix. He was angrier than I was. He wanted to know why I hadn't called him sooner. I didn't have a good answer for that. He said I was too private for my own good. He was probably right. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. Karen's attorney negotiated a settlement that included repayment of a significant portion of the diverted funds, not all of it, but enough to represent an acknowledgement of what had occurred. There were no criminal charges filed. In the end, that decision belonged to Derek, and I respected it. He said he was done spending energy on consequences for her when he needed to start rebuilding. I understood that. The morning after the settlement was finalized, Derek drove out to Birchwood Lane. He arrived early, around 8 in the morning, and I made eggs and toast, and we sat at the kitchen table the way we hadn't in years. He was thinner than he'd been at Father's Day. His eyes looked like the eyes of someone who had been doing a lot of thinking in dark rooms. We didn't talk about Karen much. We talked about his plans, a transfer to his company's regional office in Columbus, which would put him 40 minutes from my house. We talked about Margaret. He told me he'd found one of her old recipes in a box while packing up the house, her sour cream coffee cake, handwritten on an index card, smudged with what was probably butter. He'd been afraid to use it. I told him that was exactly what it was for. I'm sorry, Dad, he said, over his coffee. I should have checked. I should have asked. You trusted your wife, I said. That's not a character flaw. You didn't say anything for 3 years. No, I said. I didn't. Why did you finally say something? I thought about that. I didn't. Exactly, I said. You asked me. You walked in here and you asked me directly. And I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't sit there and pretend. Not on Father's Day. Not looking at your face. He nodded. He poured more coffee. Outside, the cardinal was back at the feeder. I'm moving by September, he said. I'll clear out the side garage. I said, you can keep boxes there while you figure out the new place. He smiled, the real one. The 12-year-old one. You don't have to do that. I want to, I said. That's different from having to. I have thought a lot, in the months since, about silence, about the specific ways that good men convince themselves that saying nothing is the same as causing no harm. I was raised to believe that pride and restraint were virtues, that a man who carried his trouble quietly was stronger than one who set it down in the middle of the room and asked for help lifting it. I don't believe that anymore. Or maybe I do. A little, but I believe other things alongside it now. I believe that 3 years of silence cost my son and me something we will spend years recovering. I believe that the people who love us cannot help us carry what they do not know. We are holding. Margaret would have known. She had a way of seeing through the front I put up, of asking the exact question that undid me. Harold, she would have said, sometime in year 1. Has the money actually been coming in? Because you've seemed funny about expenses lately. And I would have deflected, and she would have waited. And eventually I would have told her the truth. Because with her, I could never maintain the performance for long. Without her, I maintained it for 37 months. I don't say this to make anyone feel sorry for me. I say it because I think it's important to name. Grief doesn't just take the person. It takes the witnesses, the people who saw through you, the people who made honesty feel safe. I'm working on that now. On making honesty feel possible without her here to ask the right question. Derek moved to Columbus in early September. He found a rental apartment 6 miles from me, not close enough that either of us would feel watched. Far enough that visits would still feel like events. He came over 2 Sundays ago to help me rearrange the garden beds. We argued about where to put the dahlias. He thought the east side got better afternoon light. I thought he was wrong. We planted them on the east side. I have started going to a Tuesday evening group at the community center, not grief counseling exactly. More of a social thing, for people in a similar phase of life. I go for the conversation more than anything. There's a man named Eugene who was a civil engineer and likes to argue about concrete formulations, which I find obscurely comforting. Things are not the same as they were. They will not be. But there is something to be said for sitting on a back porch on a Tuesday evening with a glass of iced tea, watching the dahlias on the east side of the garden decide whether they're going to be right or wrong, and knowing that the person who will drive over from 6 miles away to discuss it is someone I no longer have anything hidden from. That's not a small thing. That's everything. Actually, and it started with a question I almost didn't answer honestly. On a Father's Day afternoon, at a kitchen table, with a cup of coffee going cold between my hands, if you are carrying something you haven't said yet, say it. Not because it will be easy. It won't be. But because the people who love you are navigating in the dark with maps you haven't given them. And 3 years is a long time to walk alone through something you didn't have to walk alone through. That's what I know now. That. And where to plant dahlias.